Welcome to Suffolk Matters, where all of Suffolk County meets the men and women of Suffolk AME. News, opinions, and insights you won't hear anywhere else. Here's your host, the president of New York's largest independent union, Suffolk AME's Dan Leveler.
Welcome to another edition of Suffolk Matters on Walk 97.5 and 94.3 The Shark, where Suffolk County meets the men and women of Suffolk AME. News and views you can't hear anywhere else. So my guest this morning, long time of Suffolk AME, the Honorable Peter Abbate. Good morning, Peter. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Oh, good. Great to be here. It's been a while, since I've been on the radio show. And first and utmost, I really want to congratulate you on your re-election to one of the chairs of the Public Employees Conference. It's been a while since the Suffolk County employees have had someone re-elected.
Yeah, it's very true, and it's a great conference. Over 90 unions at this point, across the state of New York. I'm actively involved. The chairman really, puts together a great program, gets some great dialogue going, great engagement, and, we work on and off hours. While we're at the conference, we're working. While we're, in session, let's say, and then when we're out of session, it's all conversations, trying to understand the issues and move things forward. So, and it's, a great conference to be part of. You get a big slice of diversity across all different types of public worker jobs.
No, it was a pleasure working with the conference over the years, and what influence it really brings to the state workforce, the county and state workforce throughout the state, the ideas and the dialogue that goes on.
Yeah, I think it's vital that labor sticks together, and having an umbrella like the Public Employee Conference is a great way to kind of find all those common issues and work them. And I'm very happy to be a part of that. And
congratulations again.
Yeah, no, thank you. So let's get into your background. I mean, you were a very long-serving assemblyman. A lot to be said about that on a lot of levels, but let's just get into what got you inspired to get into public service and what kept you engaged for so long.
Well, when I got involved, it's actually almost 50 years, 36 years in the New York State Assembly. But as I was growing up in high school and in college, it was really a time of participation of young people in the 60s and 70s. Yeah. John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King. So it inspired me when I went to school to major in political science. I started with history and then political science.
Right.
And really found it very interesting. Maybe not so much the subjects of Aristotle and Plato, but the hands-on things, helping people,
right,
was great about doing that. So that really got me started.
Yeah. And then, to continue for so many years, I know... work in Albany in general, even from my side of things, not even, being an assemblyman or a Senate, someone on the Senate, that level of work is cumbersome at times, a lot of difficult conversations, whatever else. And to do that for so many years, there had to be something about that. Right?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you have to be happy what you're doing, and you got to feel that you're accomplishing something, that there's some fulfillment to doing the work and helping. And I think the most important thing is helping people. It's public service. That's what it's called. So You're doing the service to the people. And every time something gets done, and you figure whether it was one individual or a group of individuals you helped, that sort of motivates you to keep going. No different than, almost any other profession. When you provide something for the people you represent,
yeah,
it's important.
That's very true. I know that in my own life. Getting things done gets you to show up the next day.
Your profession is not much different, serving people.
So let's talk about, the role of the elected official, again, rewinding 30 some odd years, the world was a different place. How things got done was different, now with, modern conveniences and changes in, how people deal with each other and their expectations. How do you find that the role of, legislators and the expectation of legislators has changed over the years?
I think it's changed greatly, especially in the last couple of years. When I first started working and worked for a United States congressman before elected, and even before that, when my local congressman, there was no such thing as like a district office where people can go in and hands-on staff.
Right.
It was more ideology. The assembly person and the senator worked in Albany. The congressman worked on major issues. Only concerned was legislation and issues. It wasn't day-to-day helping people. It was more, today it's more hands-on. But actually it's going back. So now it's going back to that stage where elected officials, whether it's union leaders and all, it's not so much the practical part of helping people. It's actually going back to ideology.
Right.
And it's the issue rather than the service now that's has a lot of politicians' minds going.
Yeah, I guess you can see that even in the news cycle, the things that people talk about. But I know, from various elected officials, you talk about the district office and folks stopping by, and they're not even stopping by to talk about something that would be germane to that office. Saying, hey, listen, I'm having a hard time getting my garbage picked up. And then, the assemblyman, the senator, or whatever, they figure out who to call on behalf of the resident. And, it's not
That's
even
so true. Whether, as the assemblyman, whether it was a city or a county issue, a state issue, or a federal issue, if someone walked into the office, it was important that, either you gave them guidance where to go or you tried to solve the problem.
Right.
And no different, I'm sure, 30 years ago, unions and labor organizations didn't have offices where people go in to really file grievances or something happening on the job. It was almost impossible. I've been to your office.
Yeah.
It was almost impossible in the old days for someone to get some help without tracking down someone. Now you have a whole staff that you've put together that takes care of people's individual problems.
Sure. I mean, it used to be what we'd call trunk work, right?
Yeah.
All the paperwork was in the back trunk, and,
Not anymore. Now you got file cabinets filled.
So, one of the things that strikes me firsthand, being involved and seeing people and trying to get things done with legislators and other elected officials, it's lost sometimes when I speak to members, and they kind of depersonalize the elected official. Like they're the office, not the person. And I'm struck by the individual. Like I have a tendency to meet the individuals. They may be elected, but they're a person, right? They've got their thoughts, they've got their ideas, they've got their motivations, their goals, but they're human beings.
We're regular people in the profession that wants to serve the community. It's important, and the longer you're there and the more people you meet and the coalitions you build is so important in the job. Speaking of yourself and other labor leaders coming up to Albany and meeting people year after year and knowing and learning.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of things the elected officials have no clue about until they meet with union presidents and labor leaders and everything, find out what the problems are in their own district.
Right.
Well, I'm from Brooklyn, New York, so, when you talk about the Suffolk County municipal employees and we have DC 37 in the city,
right,
such common problems with the issues in the workplace. So, we're there to try to be and put ourselves in that position. Most of our families and all are, people, everyday people who just work in the community.
Right. Yeah, I was always struck by, you talk about that education, and my approach initially was I've got to learn the process, I've got to learn the people, I've got to, and I was looking at education for myself, right? A way for me to understand how to get things done and to educate the elected officials that is an ongoing big component.
Ongoing education, whether it was in the field of elected officials, labor leaders, or almost anything, teachers and all, ongoing education. There are such, and I know you've gone to a few, I've gone to, the county and federal and state legislators associations, the National Council of State Legislators, and so many groups like that. And then, I don't know, but we have the Cornell School of Labor, Harvard,
Sure.
Harvard.
Those are great examples. I mean, when I first came in to do this job, I knew I had to learn things, right? Not just from the elected officials, but, about labor in general, about governance, about finance, all these different things. So I sought out the best places to learn. I went to Cornell for labor.
Oh, okay.
I went to Wharton for finance. I went to Harvard for governance. And, these are all very interesting complicated but interesting ways to educate yourself, to be able to, very quickly get yourself up to speed and be able to sit in a room with people that maybe, went to school for, 8 years on governance. Yeah.
That's so important. And as the former chair of the Government Employees Union, I'll relate to that a lot. But it's so important for labor leaders to know the history
Sure.
of the movement, to know what's going on in the past. Like, you go on to some of our greatest union leaders in the past, whether it was, I go back to the city again, Victor Gottbaum, Al Shanker, and people like that. Those are people who actually set up what you just mentioned, the schools and education you got, to learn from what they did, to put it in practical use today for their members. I mean, that's so important. You just can't walk in and just sit on the job and think you know everything and everything. History is such an important part of it, and incumbency, being there, going through it year after year.
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said about training that next generation. I think as you're in and doing the job as a legislator, when you were up in Albany and doing things, new folks are coming in. They don't understand all the things that you understand. They didn't learn all the things that you learned through hard knocks and through conversations and whatever else. And so getting them that education so they're up to speed and ready to go. I mean, I think the worst thing any organization can do is really, kind of reset itself to zero and say, okay, let's figure everything out from scratch again.
It's so important to work your way up. They talk about incumbency and term limits and all. There's something to be said about someone who's been in the profession for a long time and who's no different than the New York State Assemblyman. When you want to hire a plumber, you want someone with experience or an electrician.
Right.
I could also throw in they should be union.
They should be, yes.
But they, you want someone experienced. You don't want someone coming in just for the sake, and I've seen that in the legislature, just coming in for the sake, I want to be an assemblyman, I want to be a senator, I want to be a president or a vice president of a union, I want to be this, to run an organization. I mean, it takes patience. And it's working with long-term people and bringing in new people as you go along.
Right.
And the one thing that upsets me with some of the newer people is you don't want people coming in, and it's happening today, you don't want people coming in who's just constantly knocking the leadership and the organization of our country.
Right.
Or any profession. You don't want people coming in, no, that's no good, they did that wrong, this was done wrong, and everything. I want people coming in with ideas and want to work to make the organization better and not put it down.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, listen, I think to the times we worked together up in Albany and, he's talking about having, experience up there and being up there for 36 years, and I'd have a conversation with you, say, hey, listen, this is what we're working on today. I know I've got to see other folks other than you, and you would know where their office was. You'd know what time of day to get them. Like, hey, they're not really a morning person. Maybe you want to see them after they have their coffee. All this. I mean, it's these little things. And then on top of that, like you say, the education, the knowing of the issues and knowing of the players. And
it's so important to get to know the colleagues in your field, like the other assembly members in the Senate. And it changes. There's a lot of changes going on. But knowing how to change and letting people know that it might not always be something they see on the surface that's important, but the key is that it's always for them. Yeah. They're always working for them. That's so important for people to know that you're there. And they'll get some, negative things that they might not appreciate, but in the whole, if you do that, it's fine.
So let's talk about, like, some of the skills of elected officials, right? We know you've got to work for people. You've got to hear their issues. You got to understand their issues. But every day you got to engage in different negotiations, whether it's in the hallway or on the floor, right? Problem solving, relationship building. How do all those skills factor into the work that you did?
It's just time. First of all, it's sort of instinct, but it's also time working in the profession, going back, someone who knows the profession and all, how to change. I've gone through, 6 governors, some Republicans, some Democrats.
Right.
You got to know in their ideology how to get to them and all. And I'm sure in yours, you have to go through county execs, local legislators. And just meeting with them on a level day in and day out is so important that they trust you and you trust them. When there's a handshake and it's a deal. But knowing that is so important to the profession.
Yeah, no, I agree. And listen, again, on public office, I think there's some belief in the world that, you have to be a certain person. You have to have come up through a certain profession or whatever else. And it's like, sometimes assume that you need, a law degree, or you have to have been, your family had to have been in politics forever. And, for people that want to get involved in public service, I mean, what advice would you give them with regards to that? Like, it's a perceived barrier that I don't know if is necessarily true.
It has nothing to do with eliteness or profession and all. Depending what you want to do, Assembly, Senate, Council, labor leader, doctor, it's what you care about in doing that. I mean, I had some of my colleagues who, some of them, the brightest lawyers in the world.
Right.
The two people I won't mention names, but two of them. But when they would get up to debate a bill, they just couldn't do it.
Right.
They couldn't, no matter what all their education and experience, they were horrible on the floor of the Assembly trying to debate a bill that sometimes a bill could be done in 10 minutes. They would be an hour trying to convince people to vote for it. And these are lawyers who went to Harvard and other schools.
Yeah, right.
So
right.
it could be an individual. Then I had people who were Assembly people from upstate who was a farmer, another one a dry cleaner.
Right.
Who can get out there and just talk to the members of the Assembly and get their legislation passed.
Right.
So it's.
So I think there's probably some skills you're just born with and you can't learn. You have them or you don't.
And you learn as you go along.
Yeah.
After that. Yeah.
And then you combine that with
embellish
education.
on the things you know, and you follow other people. I mean, everyone has someone they look up to in whatever field it is, and you try to, copy or just adjust yourself to that. Let me be like that person.
Right, yeah. But listen, again, talking more about legislation, there have been a number of initiatives that we've had that, we work with you over years. And, sometimes, maybe after the fact the story was funny, during session maybe it wasn't so funny, but you'll find that there's, some interpersonal issue with one legislator or another, so something that needs to be moved isn't going to be moved because there's some, whatever. Again, that human element. But can you get into some, like, I guess some examples of legislation that, it took a while and it took some persistence, and it took years to see real progress.
Oh, quite a bit of that legislation was like that. It just took a few years just to get some changes to Tier 6.
Yeah.
Was something that I had started and finally got done after. But probably the most important one was the 9/11 bill.
Sure.
That took after the incident at the World Trade Center, it took 4.5 years to get that bill signed into law. And that was persistence, working on people who didn't want to spend the money, whether it was the mayor in New York City, the governor at the time, the Senate, which the Assembly was in Democratic control, the Senate was in Republican control, just going to 4.5 years to get that done. And now it's almost 25 years later, and it's still in existence. And finally, years ago, the federal government came on board with the Zagrota bill. So that's
Right.
a long time, working 4.5 years on a bill.
Yeah.
And that's long. But
Yeah.
most bills don't get done in the first year. It takes a year or two from when someone introduces a bill or a group comes to them and asks them to introduce a bill. So it's patience and persistence, talking to members and convincing members that might not understand it or might not want to vote for it, why it's important.
Right, yeah. Coalition building, everything else. And for anyone who doesn't know, the 9/11 bill that you're talking about, it was presumptive, right? So it meant if you were working on, you're working at ground zero and you were exposing yourself to who knows what, if there was an illness that certain, it was defined in the bill, certain types of cancers and whatever else, it was presumed that you got it working there and at that time. And I think, to ask the folks that stepped up as heroes from any line of work that got in there, they were construction workers, they were first responders, there was all sorts of folks that were all involved in being over there, to ask the government to say, hey, listen, let's look out for these people. When we needed them, they were there, and when they need us, we should be there.
No, so true. And because of the 9/11 bill, not only did that pass, but over the 20 years, 25 years since that, we've had presumptive bills for everyday workers, public employees,
Sure.
and we've extended those, enlarged those, and all. So from there, it went on to really helping. God forbid you got hurt on the job. When COVID came in.
Yes.
All of that came about because, we had some history on the 9/11 bill.
Yeah.
Someone in Suffolk County, public employee, got ill because of COVID. We tried to extend that.
Yeah.
Someone died. Aid to the family and all. It was so important to get done. And I remember it was you and some of your representatives from the board came up and fought very hard during COVID and other times to get stuff done for the workers.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you talk about an example of, seeing a good idea and adapting it, and I think that COVID, following that 9/11 presumptive disability, that COVID presumption out in Suffolk County, and then became something for the state, it was that same thing. Like, hey, this is something that works, and this is a way it works, and it took years to build, but now we know how to do it. And if we replace these words with those words, this thing can happen, and it did.
And that's what you go back to, where a senior member would know that history and then pass that on to one of the newer members that are coming in. This is why we're going to do this, because we did this 20 years ago, and now we have another incident where we have to do something. And hopefully that new member will carry that forward,
Yeah, I remember your warning years ago, and you still, you sound the alarm on this, but you say, we've got new people coming in, and they come in and they don't know your issues, they don't know other people's issues, they're just in and they've got the job, and right now they're trying to figure out process and procedure, who their staff people is, how does the fax machine work, should I send an email or should this be over the phone, like all those basic things. But you warn, like, hey, listen, if they come in, I can think of a few examples where people, maybe wanted to modernize things and say, well, you can't come in and physically speak to me, but you can go on this app and make an appointment and whatever. And those things tend to fall apart right away because, this is a people business. This is an in-person, sitting down, looking, eye to eye, and as much educating yourself as you're educating the other person. I always learn something when I go to Albany. Most of the time I learn that I don't like driving up there and physically being there, but the work has to be done.
There's nothing like being there in person.
That's exactly it.
And have a presence there.
And I think it's felt by the elected also, because they go through the same thing that we do. Unless you're living in the area, you've got to travel there. You're away from home. You're away from friends and family, everything else, and you're there doing the work of the people, which is that's admirable. Or on a very personal level, you probably want to be, at home on your couch, right?
Yeah.
And to see that other people are willing to go and be there with you also, and work on issues like they're working on issues, it kind of, I don't want to say even footing, but at least,
We're there about 26 to 30 weeks a year.
Yeah.
In Albany, driving back and forth. I knew every pothole on the thruway.
Oh, yeah.
And the people who really get stuff done is important, whether it's yourself or other people up there. I'm sure that you made at least 10 to 12 trips a year up there.
Easily, yeah.
Easily to do that, to be in contact, and that's so important. And a lot of people don't realize that the work, and even my work, is not only in my district, but it's also in Albany and back and forth. And you got to weigh the decisions. You might not be able to make something, a dinner dance or a party or an event for a local organization, because you got to be in Albany, and just the opposite. Sometimes you got to leave Albany early to get back to the district.
Yeah.
And I'm sure,
It's very true. I mean, I've lived that, But I also found, if you're not up there and you're not consistent, you're not seeing people, they forget about you, because the second there is that vacancy in an office that would normally be your appointment, someone else is taking that appointment. There is no end of people with issues they want to discuss with elected officials, and And so being there and kind of working your way up on the line, right? There's that waiting list. You've got to make relationships. You've got to be able to get into the office, and then once you're in the office, you've got to try and produce results, right? So.
I'm sure, it's 100%. I'm sure I told you this when we first met years ago on everything when you came up. And other groups come up, they lobby in January and February. The budget comes out, and they lobby. And I've always told people, and I'm sure I told you a number of times, it's nice you're up here with some of your membership and all in January. You got to be up here the last week in March, because the last person in that room, when the elected official has 50 things sitting by him, if you just see you or someone in the hallway again, you remember, oh, yes, I promised that back then. Right. I got to take care of that. Right.
Yeah. So, getting in early means you're heard, but being there late when things are just, getting finalized. And I can, there's the expression, the big ugly, but when the budget goes through and there's that last minute, figuring out what's staying in, what's going out, the whole
it's
nine,
tough.
And that means sometimes sitting on a couch, 2 o'clock in the morning, just sitting there waiting for somebody to come out of an office just to grab their ear.
And it's that, and I got to tell you, some of the hardest things to do is sometimes your voting record and what you do in office. A good example is a few years back, there was a bill that a lot of the labor organizations didn't like.
Right.
Now, this bill was going to pass with 90 votes. There are 150 members in the Assembly in each Senate. It was going to pass. So I went to the interested party and said, listen, I can vote no with you guys because you don't like the bill, but it's going to pass.
It's going to pass.
Or I can vote yes because then I can build a coalition when I have your other bills that you want to come up to go.
Right.
So I gave them that choice. And then what would happen is a lot of negative, the leadership of the organization said it was fine, but the ranking members of those didn't understand that, and a lot of them were angry because the opposition and other people were saying that. It took almost a year and a half for people to understand why I did those moves, and then everyone said, oh, you were right.
Yes.
But it took a year and a half for it to filter down to the rank and file, my constituents, to understand why I voted for that. So, it can be very dangerous at times. But if people are thoughtful and they understand why you take that stand on an issue or why you did a certain thing, I think that's important.
Yeah, that happens in the union world, too, where you've got to make a move that's in everybody's best interest that isn't immediately apparent. And you do it because you know it's the right thing to do. And you've got to live with your conscience, right? And you say, okay, well, I could take the easy way out and be popular today and everyone gets hurt, or I could do the right thing here and have to go through, the meat grinder.
And then a year and a half later, they said, he was right.
And listen, I make it very easy on myself. I do the things I thought this union was supposed to do when I was a rank and file member. And so consistently, I get what you're saying. You've got to, and I guess there's that other component to it also. So if you were to vote yes for something that you know is going to pass and you might not necessarily love it, because you were in the majority vote, you can revisit the vote. If you were in the minority vote, you don't get to revisit the vote. So you get to, maybe reopen debate or maybe make amendments that otherwise couldn't happen. I see people, especially on the federal level, they get very confused by like, hey, why did this person vote this way? It was to preserve their rights to make a change because, at their core, they were telling their constituents they didn't want the thing. And, and then when they went for the thing, that seems very confusing, but they're preserving their right to go back in and make that change.
And I think in the long run, people, if they know the issue and study it, realize why after, especially if you've done it once or twice, and they see it, then they'll sort of understand it. And again, too many people back in my district was, he did that, and I mean, get it to the people why you did it. And I said it takes time for the people to know they shouldn't have a knee-jerk reaction to it.
Right.
And that was important.
So we've got just a little bit of time left, and so I want to just, one last question, I guess, really. Just looking back on your career, what's one lesson you hope people can take away about the role of long-serving officials in shaping our communities?
Yeah, well, I think they should take back that whether it's an elected official or not, it's just like I said, starting in the beginning. You want someone with experience, someone who you can trust, someone who, works hard for you in the community. Going back, you want a good plumber. You want a good electrician.
Right.
You're a doctor. And sure, there are new doctors coming in with new techniques and all, but there's also experience.
Sure.
So I think that's probably the important part. But honesty and trust, and someone who's committed, wants the organization, the assembly and government, wants that to work for you. Right. Not someone who's coming in looking, I want to run because I want to run for office.
Right.
I want the title.
Yeah.
And that's it. And not have any experience or say what they're going to do different.
Right.
That's the key. What are your ideas, and not why you're knocking Assemblyman Abbate and you don't have anything to do.
Yeah. And, I could say within AME, when we do our endorsements, we have an exhaustive process. We ask for some written materials. We have, in-person interviews. There's all of this different stuff we do because we want to be thorough and we want to share our thoughts with the world, using this and other venues to kind of get that message out.
Well, I think the elected officials know that from you.
Oh, yeah. But, there are times where there's an elected official that maybe wasn't perfect in their record. In their previous, in the previous session, let's say, and we'll address that with them. But bringing in a new person to replace them means that new person's got to learn all the things they already know. So sometimes it's easier to make small corrections with somebody that knows what they're doing than it is to bring somebody in new.
Oh, yeah, sure. It's always easy. You go, listen, I wasn't happy what you did there. Maybe you want to change a little next time or something.
Sure.
Oh, that's happened to me quite often. I'm not happy. You didn't do that right and everything. Okay, local groups always do that.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's important that my constituents always knew that I was out there for them. And if they had a question why I did something, I was always available to answer it. It's hard when you got to represent, 130,000 people to get that message out. But if people know you and they listen, hopefully that works better than someone just putting negative stuff out against you.
Sure.
And it's a great profession. I think young people should think about it, and not everything that elected officials not a great profession. I think it's public service is an honorable thing to do.
It's absolutely necessary. And I think, when you say public service, I think about my members also, out there doing the day-to-day jobs that they do.
There is no government.
All the way, right, the way up to,
There are no elected officials without the county, the state, and the federal workforce. That's it.
Sure.
They're the move. They say Wall Street are the movers and shakers. You know what? It's the federal, state, and county workers who are the movers and shakers to get things done.
I agree.
Day to day that help people.
Yeah. So my guest this morning is Peter Abbate, longtime assembly member and friend to AME. So, Peter, I want to thank you for coming out again today.
My pleasure. It's always great to come out and talk to old friends and see the success going on out here. I think you built a great organization. It's strong, powerful, and I know it has respect in Albany and the Assembly. I mean, every time I've been in an event, you even get the state controller down all the time.
Sure.
People know now that Suffolk County employees are a place to be and to make sure they're taken care of. You are a voice now in Albany.
So, and again, I want to thank you for joining us. And to our listeners, we'll speak to you next week.